Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick.
I'm Karl.
And today on the Online Great Books podcast, we're going to talk about holistic resource management by one Allan Savory. You know, I successfully executed a shoot maneuver, Karl.
What was that?
That's when I tricked my friend into reading a long technical book in 6 days that I've already read.
Yeah, you made me read a ranching book, and this ranching book is, 548 pages.
Yeah. Is it really a ranching book, though?
Well, it's that and more. It's actually enjoyable. It's an enjoyable book. He's an interesting guy, tied up in history of Zimbabwe, fought in a losing cause, had to flee the country. But all that's like in the background, and this is really mostly just about how to get the most out of your land. But it's written by the world's most interesting man.
Yeah, his infographic page says, Zimbabwean ecologist, farmer, soldier, exile, environmentalist, international consultant, and president and co-founder of the Savory Institute. This guy is a very, very interesting man. He was a soldier. He was a game warden. From what I understand, he ended up being sort of a ranger type soldier where he used his tracking skills he developed as a game warden to track down the enemy. And he's an ecologist. You know, he tells a story here at the beginning of the book about seeing the desertification of his country and being charged with fixing that and ordering the reduction of the elephant population, which resulted in the slaughter of tens of thousands of elephants. He is most regretful about that. A sensitive, interesting man.
So this book, out of my wheelhouse, I guess, but my wheelhouse is big. It's a sort of thing, if you join with us, I'm going to plug our joint venture here. Yeah. If you join with Online Great Books, okay, and you start reading the great books and you work your way through it and learn how to think through what other people say, I think you could probably pick up a book like Holistic Resource Management and understand it. And so it makes your wheelhouse bigger.
Yeah.
So that you can take in stuff that's really outside of it. I hadn't really thought about ranching. I'm probably never going to run cattle, maybe a pig. I don't know. But it's a compelling case. One of the things that hit me, this is on page 8.
Well, before we dive into the text, I got to sell the book.
Oh, okay.
If you care about regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, permaculture, homesteading, profitability, this is a very, very important book. This is not just a book, Karl, that I said, hey, man, you know, I've read this. I kind of liked it. We should read it. Like, this is a formative text in the circles that are trying to fix a lot of the problems with big ag. In this book here and Savory's methods, you can go find a TED Talk that he's done that gives you a summation of his ideas. It's very helpful. It's probably the only helpful TED Talk. There you go. But his ideas here build on this Frenchman, André Voisin. So some people talk about, it's spelled Voisin, Voisin, grazing techniques, or it goes under several different names. But he took that man's ideas and has expanded upon them and made conceptualized the stuff a little more and made it less concrete and more applicable to different situations. Mm-hmm. And so this is the book. Yeah. This is where it starts.
I kind of want to go big picture why you ought to care about this stuff. So we had a gentleman at the gym where I train people. It's before the current situation. I think he went back home to the farm, but works in agriculture. He works in big ag. Mm. And this podcast might make people mad at us.
It's fine.
But I say everything I'm going to say with love, all right? Occasionally, we would talk about vegetarianism. Mm-hmm. Not vegetarianism as an individual choice. That's fine. Do whatever. Great. Okay? Make your own dietary choices. It's fine. But as a mandated position for all of humanity, And he would get so upset. He didn't think it worked out. And I want to tell you why it probably doesn't work out. So on page 8, you might not know this, dear listener, that your farmer fields are fertilized with oil.
Yep.
They are. So that corn you see, they're putting a whole bunch of fertilizer on it. And Savory says, because of heavy use of machinery, fertilizer, and chemicals, we consume about 9.8 calories of petrochemical energy to produce 1 calorie of sunlight energy in the form of food.
Yeah. Let me bust it down. Farmers are not pouring diesel or oil or crude or grease on the ground.
That doesn't work.
That's not the way it goes. You've got to have hydrocarbon energy to melt the steel, to cast the block for the John Deere tractor, to build the tires, to put diesel in the thing. And then maybe the biggest one is it takes enormous quantities of natural gas in particular to make nitrogen fertilizer.
Right.
We are consuming, it costs us right now, in general, more than 1 calorie to get a calorie of foodstuffs.
10 times. At least in 1987 or 88 when this book was written.
And it's much worse than that now. And if you believe in what my thermodynamics class taught me at the University of Oklahoma, we can't do that for very long.
Probably not. I mean, so trying to get away from fossil fuels and get away from meat eating, you're going to get into starvation, it seems to me, because you just won't be able to make the food that you need, especially if you, if you fly over this country, or better yet, drive through it, which you ought to do at some point in your life.
Don't drive through Oklahoma, though. We're full.
Well, you don't stop.
Yeah,
right?
Please.
They can drive through, but they can't stop.
I don't know. I don't need them clogging the roads up. Just fly over us. So it'll be fine.
But, take a look at the country, and I live in farmland where there's a whole lot of corn. It's all monoculture. It's corn everywhere. And you could probably do pretty well here because it's what Savory calls a non-brittle environment. And we'll have to talk about what that means. But if you go west of here, if you go once you hit Oklahoma, I think about 30 miles in, it becomes brittle.
Yep.
And then the further west you go, it's all brittle until you get to the sheltered valleys in California or maybe the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I want to hedge and issue disclaimers here. I'm not anti-oil. I'm not anti-petroleum. And I don't really think Savory is either. But you just look at the math and you realize, if we keep doing it this way, everyone's going to die. You can't put 50 calories in to get 1 calorie out before you use up all the energy we have. And of course, calorie is a measure of energy. It's a measure of heat. It's not just applicable to food. There are calories in gallons of gasoline and in ricks of firewood. And if it costs you more calories to get a calorie than you've got in it, you're running an energy debt, and you just can't do it. And and not only that, but he's also worried about the destruction of farmland to the point that the energy deficit doesn't even matter. There's no soil to grow anything in.
It would be the world would be one big hydroponics experiment.
Yeah.
You'd have to grow your food. It'd all be chemically done. For fun, those of you who count your macros, you could actually count your macros in British thermal units.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or kilojoules, whatever you like, rather than calories. So mentioned that, so brittle, he's got a big distinction between brittle and non-brittle environments. And a non-brittle environment, you can pretty much do what you want with it, and it'll be okay. You could screw it up, but it's harder to screw it up. And a brittle environment, if you don't treat it right, it's going to do some kind of succession, and it might not be what you want. Succession is an environment changing from one to another. So grassland into shrubbery, into wooded, or even grassland into desert. And if you want to raise cattle on it, you can't have it changing, or if you don't want it changing. You'd like to preserve it in its current state. And a brittle landscape is more likely to go ways that you don't want it to go.
Yeah. So for Savory, a brittle environment is one that it's it's not just about low rainfall. It's really about low humidity and wide swings in moisture availability. So if it's low humidity,
we're both low humidity.
Yes. If it's low humidity and there's a rainy season and a dry season, you're very likely to end up with a brittle environment there. And he mentions some 35 inches of rainfall environments that are brittle. And that's a pretty decent amount of rain. A non-brittle environment would be one that has plenty of humidity and enough rain that water availability isn't the limiting factor in plant growth. And all of his observations and all of his recommendations swing on figuring out if you're in a brittle or a non-brittle environment, because what you do to manage that land has vastly different effects. Any given thing that you would do to that land will have vastly different effects to that land based on whether or not it's brittle or non-brittle. Mm-hmm. I'm here in eastern Oklahoma. We're in the Ozark Mountain foothills. It is non-brittle. We're 42, 44 inches of rain, miserable humidity. It rains once a week or every other week, and it's non-brittle. So our farmland tends to go from pasture to briars and brambles to shrubbery back to forest. We have to really fight that if we want to maintain our grazing land. West of here, we have the dry line, and it gets drier and it turns into the Great Plains, and that's brittle. Enid, Oklahoma would be brittle. So they're really worried about going from grassland to high desert. That's what they're fighting.
Yeah, and another thing about the difference, it's not just humidity, it's also what happens to the water when it hits the ground.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. This is a real-life example. My own parish in Homer Glen, Illinois, Annunciation, you can look it up. They're proud of it. So we've got, 5 acres of land. And when I first went to that church 20 years ago, it was grass. They did what we always do in Illinois, which is plant grass everywhere and mow it. Mm-hmm. To the west of the church is the high country, as high as it gets in Illinois, and to the east is the low country. Okay? You go right across Wilcook Road, and the water would run from the high to the low, and it would flood everybody east of the road. Well, what the pastor decided to do, I don't know who convinced him to do it, or if he came up with it on his own. They made it back into prairie. Okay, so it's easier to do that here, I think, than it is in the dry areas. But planted a whole bunch of grasses that would have been in Illinois before we cut it all down for farming. Now what happens, the water comes through, and you have these deep-rooted plants that suck up the water and slow it down. And so more of the water that comes into the property goes into the plants and into the ground rather than rushing across the street and flooding everybody that's downstream of it. It wasn't a brittle environment, it's too wet here, but taking it from a place where the water didn't do its job to a place where the water does its job. Mm-hmm. And that changes the environment of the area. So now it's just covered in prairie. Looks and there's wildlife everywhere and birds, and it's pleasant.
It's pleasant.
But it also makes the people downstream not flood. Mm-hmm. They didn't change the grade of the land, they just changed what was on it. And it's made all the difference.
Is there anything revolutionary about this book, Karl?
Yes, I think. On brittle land, what do you do to make it non-brittle? His observation of that is something that might make people mad.
Good. Screw them.
Salty today.
I've been mad for 46 years. They can just go ahead and get mad with me.
The fact is you got to have cattle.
Yeah. So one of his key observations, when there were large grazing ruminant animal herds that were unfenced, there was no desertification. And even these brittle environments, and he claims that over half of the globe is brittle, I believe that, even these brittle environments responded well in a symbiotic relationship with large herds of grazing ruminant animals. And so in North America, that was the bison herds. Mm-hmm. They would blacken the landscape from horizon to horizon and pass through in a matter of days, trampling everything underfoot, nipping and biting and grazing all the vegetation away, poop and pee on it. It's important. And then move on, and then the land could rest. And the next time they migrated through that area, it would have recovered, been fertilized. The soil would have been disturbed just enough by their hooves, and desertification wasn't a problem. And most of the Great Plains is, in fact, brittle. And you can look at African savannas, steppes of Russia, the Great Plains of the United States, and all of these sort of brittle areas that had huge herds of wild ruminant animals. They had no problems with loss of topsoil and all that stuff when that happened. So He says, By the way, after ordering tens of thousands of wild ruminant animals and herds to be destroyed in Rhodesia, and in an effort to prevent their grasslands from being overgrazed, which he believed was the source of their desertification, their loss of topsoil to desert situation, after that happened, and he saw that even though they had destroyed several million pounds of ruminant meat feeding on that land, that desertification had continued. He knew he was wrong and sought out a different answer and found it in the impact of the ruminant animal.
Yeah, I'll just give a quote from page 41. Relative high numbers of heavy herding animals concentrated and moving as they naturally do in the presence of predators support the health of the very lands we thought they destroyed. We being ecologists. So I guess your standard thing when your land starts going south is get the animals off of it and let it rest. That's what people would think, right? If we just let it rest, it'll go back to nature. The problem is,
they're eating all our grass. We need more grass. We'll stop them from eating the grass. No.
Right. So the problem is what you've done there. And this is where the holistic thing comes in. What's nature in that case? Or rather, definitions. What do you mean by nature? What's the natural state of the grassland? It's not having herd animals on it. The whole thing was stable for a long, long time until humans developed enough technology to kill them all. So the natural state's where you have buffalo on it. And it does pretty well when you have buffalo on it because, so what happens apparently when you don't have the herds on it is that the ground gets hard. That doesn't happen here in Illinois because we get plenty of rain. Happens a little bit in the summer, but it recovers plenty, in September when it starts raining again, it recovers. Go further west where you don't have much rain and you don't have hooves digging into the ground hardens over and you get the rain, and the rain goes downstream very fast. You get gullies across your fields. The water's in a hurry to get into the Mississippi, or if you're across the Continental Divide, into whatever river's on the other side. You want to slow it down so that the water actually does something on the land that you have. And so having a you don't have crops of animals. Having a herd of animals walking on it and doing what they do makes it pervious. Is that a word?
By golly, it is now. If you could be impervious, then I don't know why you couldn't be pervious.
Yeah, you want to be pervious.
So he makes 500 and something pages of arguments for why this is a good thing and what all of the wide and varied impacts of having ruminant animals on the land. What all those are, they disturb the soil just enough. They also destroy and remove litter. In those brittle environments, they don't have enough water to have decomposition of the plant material. It oxidizes and weathers. If you've ever driven through Arizona, you'll see a dead saguaro cactus out there that could be 100 years old because it doesn't decompose. It oxidizes and weathers. And when it oxidizes and weathers, the nutrients in that plant matter aren't returned to the soil. They go out into the atmosphere, and he wants that trampled down. He wants it put in contact with the earth. He wants it peed and pooped on. Because anybody that's run a backyard compost pile knows you need 3 parts of brown material, like leaves, and 1 part nitrogenous material, like green grass clippings or bison poop, to get it to compost and get hot. The animals do this, and, lo and behold, whether you think it's evolution that did it, or the Great Magnet, or some other creative force. It seems to have been put together that way over millennia so that things were balanced and the grass could have a good life, and so could the cattle and whatever top-of-the-chain predators like humans there were in that area.
There's pictures in this book, which I liked. One of them that is page 82 and 83, just to show you the difference. And I'll describe them to you because this is a podcast, non-visual. And he's got a brittle environment on the left-hand page and a non-brittle environment on the right. So the brittle one is in...
I think it was in New Mexico.
Yeah, New Mexico. I've been in New Mexico. Doesn't have much water, and unless you do something to it, the water that falls on it's just going to run down the road or in the gullies. And on the right-hand side, there's a picture of a house that burned down, and the fireplace stood, which you'll see sometimes. The fireplace is the last thing to fall down in your house. And it's out, and it's got grass growing on the mantle.
In Oregon.
On a concrete mantle. Because it's wet enough that the water stays long enough that plants can get a perch on concrete and tear it down, and that fireplace isn't going to be there much longer.
No.
And it's made of stone and concrete. So there's your difference.
Who cares, Karl? Desertification. Listen, man, our yields are going up. We get a greater yield per acre than we did. We don't need as much farmland as we did because of technology, you see. Well, Chapter 2, Political and Economic Ramifications.
Mm-hmm.
Hambrick's Cliff's Notes on this chapter. You can't have freedom if you don't have any soil.
Yeah, the soil grows on its own. If you have to keep pumping nitrogen fertilizer that you've refined in a refinery, you're probably doing it wrong. Because what happens is, and I don't have this experience, I'm not a farmer. I'm just a book guy. Okay. But apparently, if you start putting the nitrogen fertilizer on your fields, you have to always put them on your fields. And you have to put more and more of them on your fields. Tell me if this is not true, because what you've done is you have changed the balance. It is no longer natural. The natural processes would have kept the soil good. See, with the herds going over it, the soil stayed what it was. It was stable. You have made it not stable by putting a monoculture on it in one crop. I mean, crop rotation tries to solve this problem. Yeah, but we don't need to crop rotate. We just need to pour more nitrogen into it.
Yeah, the crop rotation is an attempt to reintroduce some measure of biological diversity on that land.
Yeah, figured out, by the way, in the Middle Ages in Europe.
Yeah, lots of smart people figured it out in all kinds of different places, whether it's the Three Sisters, the North American Indians talked about, the corn squash and bean co-plantings and stuff. But people have figured this out, but it's not good enough. Like if you've ever walked across a field that was under row cropping that had been like planted in corn for 10 years?
Yeah.
That soil, if it's not rainy, if it's not moist, if it hasn't rained in a week and a half, it's gray.
Yep.
So you can put nitrogen back in it, and they do, and they'll put phosphorus and potassium back in it, and maybe put some lime on it sometimes to bring the pH, take the pH back up. But they can't put the organic matter back in. They can't put the carbon back in the soil that acts as a sink for moisture. And he describes what happens. I love this here about country alpha and country undeveloped nation beta. You remember this, Karl, here on page 14?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read it. It's like 3 paragraphs. So alpha country is a developed country, you see. So one particular dismal scenario that illustrates why politicians and economists must learn new ways to address such problems almost routinely characterizes foreign aid programs emanating from nations or international agencies of all political persuasions. It begins when a highly industrialized nation, alpha, for some reason altruistic or otherwise, decides to assist a poor undeveloped nation, beta. Alpha people realize from past failures that education is better than outright gifts and material assistance. Funds are made available for beta's young people to come to alpha for higher education and for improving lower level schools in beta. People in beta respond well, and many young people earn degrees in alpha. They do this in a variety of fields associated with their poverty problems: health, agriculture, economics, administration, and so on. They return with their new knowledge and great respect. The power and respect granted a PhD back home in many undeveloped countries has to be seen to be believed. The new knowledge is applied. Better health services lead to increased population growth with little effort. What of the other resources? Beta does not have the capability to extract its own non-renewable resources, so Alpha offers to do this in various ways. Alpha has a very high consumption of resources and energy, and thus benefits from this side of the aid, even if done very fairly. Even if Beta finds that this provides much employment, brings people into centers for better health treatment and education, and brings in much foreign currency, Beta still loses its non-renewable resources without any sustainable benefit to the country. Meanwhile, the population rises fast. I'll skip a paragraph. Unfortunately, this leads to ever-rising costs and dependency on non-renewable resources. Skip another paragraph. Beta, with all the education and assistance of the early days, gradually has transformed itself into a so-called friendly government molded on beliefs of Alpha. If Alpha happens to be a democracy, there will be elections, but Beta may lack some ingredients of a democratic society, a key one being a general belief that a loyal opposition can exist. Beta people aren't convinced that losers will get a fair shake, so elections get a little rowdy and quite a bit of skull bashing occurs. Almost imperceptibly at first, Alpha begins to back its man because as unrest increases, it sees the need to protect its investments. The poor land syndrome is now well on its way. As the population continues to rise, the land continues to deteriorate, and the costs continue to grow, so the rest follows. Young men leave the land and go to seek work in urban centers. Social problems increase as families are split and urban drift accelerates. It is only a matter of time before there is rising discontent with the new way of life and a demand for change. The government is perceived to be the evil, and the government is controlled by Alpha's man. Alpha's man begins to silence the opposition in various ways. The opposition, however, only gets stronger and goes underground, where it seeks outside assistance from Alpha's enemies. I could keep going. This is a nightmare.
You skipped the best part, though.
I did about the loaning the money to buy tractors.
You go and help. So this is a story of, it's a story of colonialism gone wrong on the previous page. All right, so they try to modernize agriculture. Crops that used to be sown by hand in small mixed fields are now monocultures in large fields of neat rows so that expensive machinery bought from Alpha on credit can help the people. Insect damage increases, and so insecticides are introduced, and the damage begins to accelerate. Rivers that once ran clear start to silt up. Droughts increase in frequency and severity. You change your agriculture in, this is a big word today, unsustainable ways. And you also go into debt to make it happen. So how do you get all the fertilizer that you're going to put on your field?
Hang on, let me get my soapbox. Okay, I've got it.
I thought you had it at the ready.
I put it away. I didn't think I was going to use it today. I'm so dumb. You said earlier that your food is grown with oil.
Yeah.
Let me torture that a little more. It's grown with fiat currency. If you don't have fiat, if it's gold standard, nobody is speculating on deep water oil extraction operations. I can't imagine the Haber process that we make nitrogen fertilizer by could be financed without fiat currency. So fiat currency comes to country Beta, their population explodes, they start to deplete their land. We've seen it all. Mr. Savory here saw it in Rhodesia in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And he's writing as a man who loves Africa and has seen these things happen to them. Well, even my redneck self here in Oklahoma has read and seen enough of this happen that I know it's true. Now, if Beta accepting these methods from Alpha puts Beta in a bad position, why doesn't it happen to Alpha? Or maybe it does, and if it does, when does it happen?
Well, why does Alpha need to go to Beta anyway? So I'm thinking of the 1/4 of my ancestors that came from Ireland. Well, why'd they leave Ireland?
Taters.
They left Ireland because of potato famine.
Yeah.
Where you had incentives from the British government to plant potatoes, or even commands from the British government to plant potatoes to feed the empire. And you made it a very hospitable place for whatever the little critter was that killed all the potatoes. And 1 million of my ancestors.
Yep.
these things have consequences, and maybe we can run it out for a while, but maybe we ought to put some stuff back in the soil. So I was thinking, and Savory doesn't really talk about this very much. So we talk about fossil fuels. All right. Presuming the biotic origin of petrochemicals. Okay. If that's the case, all right, so you all heard the story in grade school that it's all these big ferns and plants and dinosaurs that died and became oil. Well, that's pretty cool, okay? So that's a lot of biomass. That's another trendy term that somehow got underground. Okay. Well, that means it was all living material at one point. Means that the earth had a whole lot of living things all over it, more lush than it is today. Imagine how much you'd have to make the billions and trillions of barrels of oil that we have. Now, let's say you make it into fertilizer. Okay, so you put the nitrogen parts of it and the other good bits of it down on the soil. What do you do with the carbony parts?
Now you make plastic out of it, Karl.
Well, if there is, anthropogenic climate change, it seems to me you want to grow as much as you can, natural stuff. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So biomass is good. Biomass keeps the planet hospitable to us. And you have to think that fossil fuels are in fact biomass.
Yeah. One of his key premises is that everything is ultimately solar.
Yeah.
He has a theory of money that he describes. This book is way more than ranching.
Sure. The solar dollar is an interesting concept.
Yeah.
I need more solar dollars, so I'm planting blueberries.
He claims several different kinds of money. One that's derived from human creativity combined with labor and raw resources. He calls that mineral dollar. And then he has what he calls paper dollars, and that's sort of like that's wealth created by like consulting, financial services, stuff like that. And then his third one he calls solar dollars. He says this is money we can generate income from human creativity, labor, and constant sources of energy such as geothermal heat, wind, tides, wave action, falling water, and most of all the sun. And he doesn't say anything about stupid solar panels, other than drawing a parallel between the photosynthetic plant leaf and the solar cell. He believes that of the three kinds of money that are created, the most important one is the one that ultimately derives from the photosynthetic capability of the plant.
Yeah. So say you have a little bit of property, or we were chatting in one of the channels on our Slack about this. Some a lady's in Manhattan, I think, and she wants to do it. She can. It's like, well, put some plants on your porch. What she would be doing then is getting some solar dollars. And I would say put plants that you can eat. That's what I'm trying to do. We haven't done very well. I'm trying to, for however long we're going to be here, trying to plant more things that I can eat and less things that are just decorative. Like we have barberries. I hate those.
Those pirates?
They're these little bushes with thorns on them. And I hate them. I want to chop them out and burn them. Okay. But they're decorative. Just haven't done it yet. I can't get at them. They stab you.
Yeah.
They're the vicious little vegetable critter. We have I think a quarter acre here. And how much of that is solar dollars? How much? So the sun falls on it and the rain falls on it. How much of that do I get back in value? I can walk around it. It's pleasant enough. But do I get anything that helps my family from my quarter acre of God's green earth?
I don't like that he called this dollars, by the way. I would rather he said wealth. Because if he said mineral wealth, okay, we know what that is. Okay, I own an iron mine. There's mineral wealth there. And then paper wealth, we all know what that is. And then solar wealth, I think, would be better because, if you have a guy that owns a parking lot in the middle of Iowa that's 10 acres and a guy that has 10 acres of perfect grazing land in Iowa, who's wealthier? Notice I said in the middle of Iowa, where there's no artificial need to stack cars up on each other like there would be in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the pasture. It's the good pasture land. And he's got an economic and political theory he lays out in this book. This is, if you don't have all of those kinds of wealth, your country's not going to make it. It's going to fall into chaos. And that there are now, and this is Hambrick's take. There are going to be different parties that are invested in one of these three different kinds of wealth, each invested in these three different kinds of wealth, that are going to be at odds with each other, vying for political power. And then ultimately, the only one that really matters is who's making the food.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the food supply is being propped up by oil we pump out of the ground.
Fiat.
Yeah, and if that were to dry up or be made extremely expensive, what happens to the food supply?
People get skinny.
And when the food supply goes away, what happens to your political stability? Starving people don't give AF.
No.
That's what was compelling to me. You know, I'm reading the book and think, gosh, I got to catch my rainwater.
Yeah.
You know, I send my rainwater down into the sewer. I need to get a barrel and catch some of that.
Page 119. By the way, this guy was a soldier, a PhD ecologist, superintendent for huge game reserves and huge environmental concerns. And he's such an interesting guy. And he was also a politician. He was a member of the parliament, or whatever the heck they call it, in Rhodesia. And then later he was able to come back to Zimbabwe and be part of the Ian Smith government, I think. But he says, economists daily engage in juggling paper dollars, sublimely unaware of the realities of wealth. Farmers, likewise, on the advice of agbiz experts, diligently pursue mineral dollars while consumptively mining their soils to do so. The Soil Conservation Service calculates that U.S. farmers export 2 bushels of soil through erosion for every bushel of corn produced. So, you know, accounting and financial state, you know, double entry accounting is a pretty amazing technological innovation. Double entry accounting allowed business activities to be much more efficient and protected people from fraud. And it's a significant technological innovation, Karl. Is that a hot take?
No.
But it only accounts for one thing. And it doesn't make any sort of an accounting for declining soil quality, thermodynamic balance in calorie production, and political tensions. And he's concerned with all of those things. And he's also concerned with the natural beauty of the world, too. I'd like to have a bush light with this man.
Me too. He's still alive. Old as 1938, you say?
1935. He'll be 86 in September. He says, sooner or later, the underlying basis of a nation's or an individual's quality of life asserts its nature. A country rolling in oil revenue. Listen, I'm in Oklahoma. A country rolling in oil revenue today must ask itself to what end the cash flows in. The nation that thrives by burning the oil must ask what that does to the ecosystem that sustains us all. What will happen to the nation's long-term quality of life, production, and landscape goals if the wealth from oil goes to accumulating paper dollars and supports unprotected legions of bureaucrats, accountants, armed forces, and the thousands of people who consume and keep transactions going but do not create any new wealth besides paper dollars? Is that sound? When all of Oklahoma's easy oil went away, we were impoverished. We've never really recovered from it.
Mm-hmm.
We built, the city of Tulsa in particular had Phillips Petroleum and Sinclair, Getty, Skelly Oil, many huge oil and gas companies came out of there, and many of them are gone and merged up and moved on. But from all of that wealth, in the 1920s, they built an enormous and amazing municipal water supply and sanitary sewer system. And then that wealth went away by, the mid-60s, and that mineral wealth went away. And now we're stuck with the infrastructure that supports a population of around 1 million people in the Tulsa metropolitan area, but without that mineral wealth it took to build it. How are we going to maintain that? How are the 1 million people going to continue to get clean water and flush the toilet when sales tax revenue was probably half what it should have been in 2020 because of the coronavirus collapse, and the mineral wealth is gone, and we're no longer able to cash those dollars? How are they going to build it back? The water system's 100 years old now. How are we going to do it? Here's the answer. Not going to do it.
People are going to move away and are going to go live in a pod in some other urban area, I guess.
We're going to build back better, Karl.
Well, that would be great. Because as I drove through your lovely state, because I've got a special pass, dear listener, I'm allowed to drive through Oklahoma.
Yeah, you have to ask Charity for a pass. She's the only one that issues those.
It has a whole lot of solar wealth. Okay? Or at least the potential to have a whole lot of solar wealth. You can get a lot out of that land. Maybe not southeast Oklahoma, but you get different stuff out of that land.
Yeah. Southeast has got, pine timber, and it's good too. Methamphetamine.
And turnpike troubadours. You got me hooked on them, darn it.
Good. What do you love about it?
Oh, there's these turns of lyrics that are, she's every girl I've ever known.
Yeah.
I like that. And my kids, whenever I put it on, the kids are like, who's that? So apparently they like it too. My kids have good taste, most of them, all but one of them.
Yeah.
So you have to imagine a thriving Oklahoma built on solar wealth is less dependent on oil prices. It's less dependent on whatever happens in the capital of our federal system.
It's less fragile. It's anti-fragile that way.
It's less brittle, to put it in Savory's terms.
Yeah. This book is high theory, man. High theory.
And cattle.
Yeah. He says that you have these foundation blocks that an ecosystem is comprised of: water cycle, mineral cycle, energy flow, and then one he calls succession. And succession is as the landscape, matures, let's say. It's
land over time.
Yeah.
It's like the fourth dimension.
Right. I think Savory also believes that there is such a thing as a political succession. He talks about the Gobi. He has an example in here. I don't know where it is. I didn't mark it. And probably around page 220 or something like that, about how the Chinese government had planted, I think, 14 million trees in an attempt to stop the spread of the Gobi Desert. The Gobi Desert was swallowing up, at the time that he wrote this, hundreds of thousands of acres every year through desertification. And they were planting these trees on the margins of the Gobi to try to stop the erosion and put a halt to it. And he said it didn't work because the trees were planted out of succession. You can't just go plant an oak tree in White Sands Missile Range in the middle of New Mexico. Or is it in Arizona? I can't remember. But you can't plant an oak tree in Bonneville Salt Flats and expect it to live and stop the desertification of that area. You have to act in the stage that is appropriate to that ecosystem. Because if you get the next step right, you have a chance. If you try to skip a step, if you try to skip the step between grasses and go straight to oak trees, you don't win. And the economics is the same way, I think, for him. If you pursue the mineral and you don't have the other things in place, you're not going to make it. There's a political economy sort of succession that is important to him.
Yeah, I like what he says about setting goals. It's not merely profit. Profit is fine. I like profit. But, what kind of life do you want to have? What kind of culture do you want to have? These are all important things, too. What it would take the people of Oklahoma. What do you want Oklahoma to be like? And then you could meet your goals. Do we want, Tulsa and Oklahoma City to be 5 million people per city? You want to be the financial capital of the world, tax haven? Or do you want solar wealth?
Yeah.
And getting food off the land and you probably won't be as rich with paper money, paper dollars. But you might be better off in a lot of ways. I was thinking, as you were talking earlier, so the Sahara Desert, it's not in human memory just because we don't have anything written down, but the Sahara Desert within human lifetime, within the human species, wasn't a desert. Something about, like, the Sphinx might have been in the middle of a jungle.
Yeah.
That thing's old, by the way.
Newsflash.
I think it's older than the pyramids. But it became desert. Might have become desert because, well, we got rid of the herding animals.
Yeah.
So if you were going to rebuild it, what would you do?
Well, he says you have to do some testing. You have to kind of figure out what's wrong and then come up with a management scheme using proper tools that would then rehabilitate that back towards your land. I think he calls it a landscape goal.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what he calls it. He's really concerned about, of course, soil quality. And the soil quality isn't just about how much carbon's in there and how much nitrogen's in there and how much organic material and whatever. He's also worried about crumb size. Like, have you ever seen a place that was, I'm sure you have, well, at the beginning of the book, The Grapes of Wrath, which I hate, there's a description in the first few pages of the dust in the Oklahoma Dust Bowl. And this fine, fine dust, and it got through every single crack and on everything, and it just settled everywhere. This fine, like flour-like, F-L-O-U-R, consistency of dust. And it rains. There's just a little bit of rain that drops. If you've ever seen raindrops hit dust, you see they don't soak in. If the dust particles are small enough and the surface tension of the water droplet is correct, the dust just envelops the water droplet, and then it sits on top of the dust and doesn't soak into the subsoil.
Mm-hmm.
They call that capping. He's very concerned about capping in desert areas, the crumb size of the soil, algal crusts, and the soil quality. And so he wants to look at all of those problems and then find out, what can we do to disrupt this situation and move in succession towards where we want to be or need to be. I'm not going to say always, but it almost always is going to include those ruminant animals. Almost always.
Makes me feel bad. I have a lawn service.
Yeah.
This is the problem. You live in suburban Illinois. You got to grow a lawn, and it's just dry enough that your lawn's not going to grow unless you do something to it. So you pay money for somebody to come and put fertilizer on your lawn. Bugs me. And sometimes they'll come out and they'll aerate your lawn. So they get this machine which got like little cog teeth on it, and it goes over your lawn and it pokes holes in your lawn. It's to prevent capping. I hate lawns. If I could not have one, I would not have one. But you got to put so much money in it just to make it look green, because it has to look green or the property values go down.
Yeah.
Terrible. But if I had ruminant animals, I could have them do it for me. So I had goats on my little quarter acre. They would walk all over the place and poop and pee, and their little hooves would aerate my land.
That wouldn't be good enough for him. You would have to rotationally graze those goats.
Well, maybe not, because it's not brittle.
Maybe.
I might be able to get away with things that you can't.
Maybe not. So here's the problem. It's pretty easy to see the problems in those non-brittle areas, Karl. The desertification, we all know about the topsoil's disappearing and whatever. You've seen my acreage. Mm-hmm. We have a big problem in that my property was unmanaged for about 30 years. So the normal tree hugger would say, "Oh, that's great. It's back to a state of nature." And no, it's not, because we have the thing called the invasive species. In Oklahoma, we have an enormous problem with the eastern red cedar. There are no animals that graze the eastern red cedar. It has no predator in Oklahoma. So if there's an eastern red cedar seedling that comes up, it's probably going to make it to adulthood. It also acidifies the soil and lowers the pH of the soil so much that native species will not grow under a cedar tree. it's a big, big problem. So the succession problem here where I am is about managing the eastern red cedar and the honey locust, frankly, which is a thorn tree that looks like something you would see on National Geographic. It's horrific. It has like 4-inch thorns on them that are hard as the hubs of hell and will flat your tractor tires, and nothing will eat them. Nothing will get close to them. Deer will, scrape on saplings and try to rub the velvet off their horns. When they're rutting, they raise cane and put scent on there and rub. Nope, not this thing. The bark never gets damaged. Nothing ever grazes them. They're a big problem. And so my place is overrun with eastern red cedars, which are acidifying and screwing up my soil, and honey locusts, which are anathema to human life.
Worse than barberries.
Oh, yeah. And just because these things exist doesn't mean they're natural. They've been allowed to get a competitive advantage that they would never have had 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, so the nature is bigger than you think it is. Nature is not, let my field just go to seed and don't do anything with it. It's not natural unless it's got all the bits of nature. That's a big question. What is natural that people probably need to think more about? So what animals live with what honey locust? Mm-hmm. Is that the tree? What animals feed on the honey locust? In its natural environment, what's that natural environment look like? If it's not Oklahoma, then it's not natural. And at my parish, you can't just plant grass and let it grow and have a prairie.
Right.
Because grass is an import. The kind of grass that we have it's like English. It's for English lawns. You have to figure out what was there.
I have almost completely worn out a brand new steel chainsaw cutting down eastern red cedars and Bradford pears. Bradford pear is a species of pear native to China and Vietnam in the family Rosaceae. It is a deciduous tree, blah, blah, blah. It's terrible. The Bradford pear is an invasive species in many areas of eastern North America, outcompeting many native plants and trees. People here, home builders, they grow quickly and they flower with a white flower, and they're the right shape. And they don't get real big, so they don't heave your foundation up and fuck up your driveway, right? Mm-hmm. So your home builder will build you a brand new tract home and plant 3 of those in the front yard and leave. Well, next thing you know, Hamburg has 27 acres of those things. Nothing eats them. They're a mess. Just because they're plants doesn't mean that they're natural here.
Right. And so then you escalate up from it's not just the plants. What else is part of that environment? What animals live there? Because the animals interact with the trees, with the soil, with everything else. If you don't have the right animals, the tree's going to go wrong. Yeah. If you don't have the right birds. There was one thing in here. This guy's having trouble with his soil, and I thought it was a neat fix.
Birds aren't real, dude.
What's that?
Birds aren't real.
Birds aren't real. They're dinosaurs.
Have you heard that? The birds aren't real. They're just surveillance devices.
Some of them.
Yeah.
There was a red-winged blackbird on that prairie by my parish that those things are mean and territorial.
Yeah, I like them though.
They see you coming and they know you're coming and they just dive bomb you. You distracted me.
Birds.
Yeah, birds. So this one guy, he wasn't getting the mineral balance in the soil right. There was something wrong. He had leaks in his water pipes. He couldn't. Said, fine, let's just leave the leaks. And they put little pans out to catch the water. So the birds had something to drink. And then the birds came back. And then his mineral balance in his soil got better.
Yeah. Everything matters.
Yeah.
There's this guy named Greg Judy who has a YouTube channel who does this stuff. So if you want to see this in action, you can go watch Greg Judy's Judy, Greg Judy's YouTube channel, and he rotationally grazes South Pole cattle on 1,700 acres in central Missouri. And Greg Judy is very concerned about everything on his place. I think he said he had built 500 birdhouses. That's what he had said. So he'll be walking through a pasture, and there's a birdhouse every 50 feet in a huge pasture, because those birds take care of a lot of the parasites that trouble the cattle. Flies come and land on the cow pies and lay eggs, which turn into maggots. The birds go pick the maggots out and help distribute the cow pie. They turn the maggots into nitrogen, put them back on the pasture, etc. And he's concerned about everything. When he cuts down these darned eastern red cedars, he has a problem with them too. He makes what he calls rabbitats, brush piles. He'll lay down several pallets on the ground. He'll throw old car hoods on top of the pallets and then pile the brush on top of that. Then the rabbits get up underneath inside those pallets under those car hoods because it keeps the rain off of them. He wants those rabbits there because they graze things that the cattle don't graze. They're also herbivores, and they eat different plants than what the cattle are grazing, and turn that stuff back to nitrogen too. They also attract coyotes. He wants coyotes because the coyotes help take care of the deer population, and everything's in balance. He never shoots a coyote. A lot of hunters drive around with a rifle in their truck to shoot the coyotes with because they'll kill calves. Well, he's like, I got plenty of rabbits. If you're a coyote, are you going to try to run down a 112-pound calf, or are you going to eat 2 rabbits?
Rabbits.
It's the rabbits every time, he says. He's very careful with that. And he does this high-density, Allan Savory style grazing. Reading this book and then watching his videos makes all of this come together for me. He has some pasture that's bottomland. So when the creek gets up, it floods, And it flooded this spring. And when it flooded, cuckleburs floated down the creek into the grass. The water came up in the pasture. The pasture had grass that, let's say, is a foot tall. The water came up into that grass, but not above it. And that grass caught every cucklebur floating down that creek. And when the water receded, it left those cuckleburs there. It came up in about 7 acres of cuckleburs, 6 feet tall. And it did it in a matter of like 3 weeks. There's a video of it on there. Well, nobody wants a cucklebur. And if it was left to God's way, they wouldn't be there very long either. They would eventually some diversity would be restored there, and the cucklebur would cease. But he doesn't have time for that. He took hot wire, electric fence, fenced that off into about 3 paddocks. He turned 500 head of cattle in on it. Now, cattle, and Savory talks about this, when they're grazing alone, they graze in a different way than they do when their friend is right next to them, shoulder to shoulder. They graze competitively when they're in a pack. Like, I better eat this or he's going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So he turns them into those cuckleburs in high density. They ate a lot of it. And what they didn't eat, they trampled. You break the stem and it's not going to make it. And over the course of about 2.5 days, they trampled down and destroyed all those cuckleburs. No pesticides, nothing. They pooped on it, put good nutrients back on the soil. They trampled that down, and that now those cucklebur plants will rot. And he did it before they went to seed. There were seeds on there, but they hadn't matured and turned brown and been ready to plant. And he stopped that succession towards cucklebur and preserved that pasture.
But he didn't use a herbicide.
He didn't use a herbicide. Another thing you could have done was hooked a brush hog to the tractor and gone in there and mowed it down. Well, the tractor's heavy. Compaction is a problem. He doesn't want to burn the fuel. It costs money.
Plus, there's forage on that acreage.
And there's forage on there. That's right.
Yeah.
And because the grazing instinct is competitive, had they been grazing that 1,700 acres freely, they would never have eaten the cucklebur because it's not palatable. They would have eaten fescue and clover and timothy and lespedeza.
Yeah, he did a great example for this. And I was thinking of me and my brothers eating. It's like if you had a smorgasbord buffet, okay, and you don't have any pressure to eat, you're going to go up and you're going to pick the things you like. You're going to get the mac and cheese. What else they have at Old Country Buffet? maybe the meatloaf. I don't know. You're going to pick the things you like.
You're going to look for the bacon for sure.
And then you're going to go sit down. And he says, what if we only replaced the food that you ate? So you go up the next time, you get the same, you're picky again, you get the same food. I don't know what page this is on. You get the same food, but the other food is starting to deteriorate. Okay. And then you go again, you keep going again. You're just getting mac and cheese and meatloaf and maybe green beans.
Yep.
And that's all you're eating. And all the rest of the food, the hush puppies are starting to grow fungus, you know.
We're going to trample those and pee on them.
Well, now let's say you bring 50 of your friends after a weightlifting meet, and you go hit that old country buffet, there won't be a scrap of food left. Then when they replace it, they'll replace everything, and it'll be fresh and happy. So you take the field, the selectively eating cattle, they'll just pick what they want. And then the things that they don't want will become fibrous and tough, will get further in its growth cycle, and non-grazable.
Yeah. When the grass is young, in the vegetative state, it's not putting on a seed head. There's not as much cellulose in it. There's higher sugar content, higher protein content. You know, everybody around here knows that if you cut hay after it goes to seed, that hay's not going to be very high quality. It's low protein. It's not as good. So he wants to be grazing when it's in that young vegetative state. And not only that, but when the animal clips the plant, when it bites it, the saliva from the cow actually stimulates the plant to grow faster because there's a symbiotic relationship between those things. Can you imagine? You can graze optimally. If you're Greg Judy and you know what you're doing, you can watch the guy do it, and he talks about it at length. He can graze 20, 30% of that vegetation off at a time and cause it to grow faster than if he'd let it go to completion and then hayed it. He gets a higher volume by letting them graze it because the grazing itself stimulates faster growth than leaving it alone.
I can even see that on my terrible lawn that I hate.
Yeah.
If I mow it, it grows. If I don't mow it, it grows a little bit and then it stops.
Yeah. And
I don't have any saliva on my mower. So that's why you put more cattle in than you think would be. This is Savory's theory. So you want to have severe grazing, but not overgrazing.
Mm-hmm.
Overgrazing is, what is overgrazing? Severe grazing for too much time?
He would call it overgrazing if the plant gets bitten a second time before it recovers.
You got to recover between bites.
Yes. So he's into high density grazing. So high animal impact, high animal density per acre for short periods of time. And then you completely remove them from that environment and give that paddock a chance to recover. And then, in the spring flush, heck, that might be 3 weeks. In the winter, in Oklahoma, it might be 75 days. But he's watching, the competent grazer, stockman, is watching and determining, what the recovery rates are and getting in there. It's the spring flush is a big problem around here because the grass is growing faster than the animals can eat it at that point. So they're moving 2-3 times a day sometimes. Sometimes they're moving every 4 to 6 hours. Sometimes they move in the night even, from what I understand, because getting them to move around the farm quickly and maybe instead of grazing, that 20 to 30% off of the plant, they're trying just to get 5% and keep moving so that the stuff doesn't go to seed immediately and the protein quality and everything go down. I have a friend, hey Mike, who has a farm down near Eufaula. And I was talking to him about this, and he raises Kiko goats and does rotational grazing there. Kiko goat's a great big old goat, meat goats. And he told me that he took some 1x6s and made a 1 square foot little box out of this 1x6, and he'll go out in the pasture and throw it down on the ground, and then clip all the grass inside that box and put it in a sack and take it back to the house. And he'll dry it till it's 12 or 14% humidity. I can't remember, or moisture. I can't remember what he said. 14 maybe. I can't remember. And then weigh it. And he'll do that several times a year in several different places each time. He'll take 4, 5, 6, 8 samples or something and then go weigh it because he's wanting to see what his carbon density, what his nutrient production is, what the carbon density is. He's been doing it for about 5 years, and it's doubled.
From
rotational grazing.
From this style. Yeah.
Yeah, by clipping that grass, encouraging it to grow, stomping it, and put it back on the ground so that you don't, like everybody's dethatched a lawn, or they've heard of that. The animal stomping it dethatches the pasture. They don't call it thatch; they call it duff, often in a pasture. And then they put nitrogen on that carbonaceous material, which causes it to compost more quickly because the bacteria that eat that need it. And then when they put the carbon in the soil, here are the worms. The worms grow, and everything works. And the places, Mike's place is just every day is more bountiful than it was before, and cheaper for him to operate, by the way.
You mentioned carbon content. So that's the big buzzword that everyone talks about now is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Well, where did that carbon dioxide in his field, where did the carbon in the cellulose in his plants, where did that come from?
The atmosphere.
So it would be good if we had better pasture lands.
Yeah, and when those cows eat that and then put it back on the pasture in the form of cow pats and then stomp it back in, they're creating an enormous carbon sink. Enormous carbon sink. And I think Savory even says that this is the solution to the CO2 problem. Animals. He says, don't worry about that methane fart. It's the fact that they drive carbonaceous growth through the roof and put it back in the soil is the thing to focus on.
Where I live used to be more rural than it is now. It was all cornfields when I was growing up. Milton the cat is talking, and I find it charming. Don't edit out Milton the cat. Leave Milton in.
Milton's raising hell.
And but there would be these times where we would have this joke in the car. My mom would be driving us around, and then, what's that smell? And then we'd all joke, and they'd all eventually point to me and say, Karl, what did you do? And I'd say, it wasn't me.
It's a feedlot, Mom.
It was the manure on the fields.
Yeah.
Which is a way to try to do this. I haven't noticed that nearly as much as I used to. I don't think they do it as much because you can just buy a whole bunch of fertilizer.
Yep. Made
from stuff you drilled out of the ground.
I love the method here. First half of the book is laying out all the problems, describing the different tools that can be used, which include like controlled burns, fertilizer, all kinds of different things. And then the last half of the book is him describing how to figure out what the problems are, and then how to apply some of these tools to remediate the problems. I'll continue to talk about Greg Judy because it's easier to talk about his examples, because this book is very abstract, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I found it very enjoyable.
I did too.
It was not a chore to read the 550 pages that you made me read.
Right. Greg Judy got a new farm. He acquires land through lease and purchase from time to time. He got a new farm, and it had a wash on it. That's a wash. It had a gully that was eroding, and it was really nasty. And he put this video out in September of 2020, I think. And you can go look it up. He rolled, I think, 6 round bales of hay into this gully. And the gully's big enough you can throw cars in it, 6 round bales of hay. And then he put his hot wire around there. And he put 375 head of cattle on that wash. Well, they ate some of the hay. They peed and pooped on it. They stomped it and packed it and compacted it down. They stomped the edges of the wash and rounded the edges of it off through the action of their hooves. And he's going to have to do it 2 or 3 more times because that hay is going to compost down and make new soil. But he did a follow-up video. Like I said, I think he did that in September. He did a follow-up video here in January. And you can already see that the cattle with that compost are healing that. Now, I have seen those washes come up since I was a little kid. People will throw tires, concrete blocks in there. They'll plant trees in them. They'll take plastic mesh and spread that through there and throw sod in there. I've seen 1,000 different approaches. And I've never seen anything work but what he did.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen anything work. I've seen people throw hay out on them and, throw straw out to, prevent the erosion, and then maybe seed Kentucky 31 or something on there. And it doesn't it doesn't work because it doesn't remediate the contour and it doesn't put carbon back in there, because when it's washing, the soil's going away and it's exposing subsoil, and nothing will grow on the subsoil. It's clay, it's sand,
Right.
it's not soil like agricultural soil. He's fixing it, and he's done it 100 times. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's like, well, there's a wash, and this is what we always do, and let me show you today. And then they'll do it, and they come back 6 months later, and he's right.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening to me. It wasn't that I had strong opinions the other way, but all of this land out there, when you drive across country, skip Oklahoma, because Scott doesn't want you there, but say you drive through Kansas, you start going west, maybe Texas, you go through Texas, and there's huge amounts of land. Texas is really big. For all you Northeasterners, it's really big. We drove from one end to the other. It took us 2 days.
Yep.
In one state. That's depressing when you're doing a cross-country drive. We were driving from Arizona to Florida and drove from, El Paso to Houston and whatever's on the eastern end of Texas. It's brittle land.
It's brittle.
What are you going to do with it? You're going to make it unproductive? And so I'm thinking of, those of you who think that vegetarianism or veganism is natural. If you want to do it yourself, that's fine. Okay? But if you think that it's going to be the natural state to support any sort of population on this planet of humans, it's not. It's not. And it won't even. What are you going to do with that land? What are you going to do with the herds of cattle? If we're not going to eat them, economically, let me go back. Let's go to the double entry accounting. Economically, let's say we all go vegan. What are you going to do with all the chickens? Well, nobody likes chickens anyway. What are you going to do with all the cattle?
Weird pets.
You're going to kill them because they're non-productive. And so you won't have them anymore. What then is going to happen to the grasslands? We don't have herds of buffalo, bison anymore.
Everything is interconnected.
So you can't, the future that you're envisioning is not the future that can be. The future that would have soil quality going up apparently includes a whole bunch of ruminants walking around. And if we're not going to have big herds, I guess you have to have them per farm. And if you don't eat them, why would you have them? And if you don't eat them, then there goes all your soil. And there comes the great Western Plains desert.
Yeah, it's happening. Yeah, that ruminant bowel is really amazing.
Can I tell you something?
Please.
I'm a little afraid of cows.
Oh, yeah, they're huge. And
they stare at you.
Yeah.
It's like they know that you're going to eat them.
Right?
Up where my in-laws used to live in Wisconsin, it's dairy country, and the cows just come up to the fence. They just look at you as you drive by with those big eyes. A little freaked out by it. And here's another fact. There is apparently no word for the generic of cattle. There's cow, which is a female, whatever they are. There's a bull, which is the male, whatever they are. There's a steer, which is the castrated bull. What do you call the animal?
Right. A single one of those. Cattle is what you call all of them, but what do you call one of them if you don't know what kind of genitals it has?
It doesn't have a name. Like human is the generic term for whatever we are, male and female, men and women. Beef critter?
Beeves.
I'm sorry, that's off topic. Things that concern me, scary cows, and what do you call them? I stay up late at night thinking about this.
The back part of the book is very practical. I don't know if everybody would want to read that, about how you lay out paddocks and what kind of rotation rate and stocking density. How many cattle per acre and how many animal days per acre are you going to put on this as you rotate through there? And I don't know if everybody wants to read that, but I think he makes a really good case for putting the ruminant bowel and the heavy hoof to work to rehabilitate this soil. I've seen it my whole life. These guys that they've got 80 acres, they've got cattle, free range. I mean, not free range because it's fenced, but they're grazing. It's a single paddock, or maybe two paddocks. They cut hay off one paddock and have them overgraze the other one all summer long. At the end of the summer, it's nothing but cuckold burrs and old bad Lespedeza. And then in the winter, they put them in a sacrificial paddock, because they're going to stomp a mud hole in it. And the farmer gets on his cab tractor and he stabs a hay bale with a spike and drops it in a hay ring in the middle of that sacrificial paddock once or twice a day. All winter long, the cattle either barely hold or perhaps lose condition and lose weight all winter long. And they probably, in order to keep him from doing that, he's going to feed them corn as well. People probably don't know this, but I think the normal cattle operator is probably only making $50, $60 a head. It takes you somewhere between 22 to maybe 26 months to get a calf to feed out and ready to go to sale for butchering. Well, think about that. So they're not even making any money on this.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it the Savory way, there is no grain. You rotationally graze them. You don't have the sacrificial paddock. You don't have the inputs. You don't have a parasite problem. You've got 350 head on 3 acres for 10 hours. They pee, they poop on it, and then you move them off. Intestinal parasites are left behind. You've got all these birds picking through the cow pies. The parasites are not a problem. They stay dry. Their fur stays clean and they're not muddy. They don't get wet. You don't have the respiratory problems. You don't have the hoof rot. You're moving them all the time, so you don't have to trim hooves. Like, the inputs are almost zero. Greg Judy only vaccinates for blackleg for one thing. And he runs hundreds and hundreds of head. That's the only input he has. That's it. And Savory watches the environment and finds a way to farm in that environment. Greg Judy says, people ask me, Greg, what kind of grass should I plant? And he says, whatever grows in your grader ditch. Because that's what grows where you are. So he plants a lot of Kentucky 31 fescue. And Kentucky 31 has an endophyte. It has a fungal symbiote in it that is toxic to some animals, but he has bred his herd and selected his herd for animals that are resistant to toxicity. Fescue foot, they call it, from that toxic endophyte. Fescue grows year-round in Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, all through this area. He has green grass in his grass stockpile that his animals are eating right now because he uses these methods. He doesn't grain them. They'll gain weight all winter long without any grain. It's astounding. He'll stand by the fence line and he'll say, look at my place, and then here's the neighbor over here. And the neighbor's pasture is overgrazed, worn out, and his is lush and green. The animals are fat, and it's amazing.
You know what it reminds me of? So I'm going to draw a parallel here.
Starting strength.
This is my job.
Oh.
So those of us who lift weights, okay, will sometimes encounter those who don't, who will say, well, gosh, I saw your deadlift. I hope you don't break your back. No, I'm fine. And then what they're going to do for the rest of their life is rest.
Right.
Okay? So if you think the body's a pasture, they're going to rest that pasture for the rest of their lives. And what happens to it?
Succession.
Succession, right? The succession to old age happens very quickly. They lose their bone density. They lose muscle mass. Everything goes to crap because they were afraid of the severe grazing, which is going in the weight room and lifting heavy things, because it looks like damage. You know, you send apparently, I've never run cattle. I don't know if I ever will, but you run your cows into that pasture, your beef critters into that pasture, and they severely graze it, and then you take them off. It looks like hell, probably. Oh my gosh, what did I do to it? What you did was stress it in the appropriate way that it will build back better. Right?
You just did what the bison would have done 300 years ago. A huge number of animals breeze through there.
Right. So the natural state of land is not rested land. That was a big takeaway for me from this book.
Yeah.
The natural state is land that's being worked hard by all the critters on it.
Yeah. I think I'm going to end up with 8 to 10 head on paddocks averaging about 22,000 square feet most of the time. Now, depending on the time of the year and rainfall and things, you'll change how long they're on the paddock and the paddock sizes. But you don't have to have huge herds to simulate that effect from the bison. Right? You could put 5 head of cattle on 400 square feet for 4 hours, and they're going to trample the hell out of it. The stocking density is what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can I do it with one?
Probably not. And because that competitive aspect that they were talking about, he talks about that competitive thing, you really need, and by the way, 10 head on 22,000 square feet, which is essentially a half an acre, 10 head on a half an acre, so the stocking density at that point is 20 per acre, apparently, from what I understand, is not the same as that same stocking density with 700 animals, though. There's something about the competitive pressure that makes them willing to eat unpalatable plants more that we really need in this non-brittle area to get rid of the eastern red cedar, to get rid of the sawbriars, to get rid of the blackberry briars, to get rid of the locust sprouts.
The unpalatable plants, that would be the deadlift.
Yeah, right.
So I was thinking, which also thrives in competitive environments, right?
Yeah.
So the competition between, so I remember talking to Matt Reynolds about this. He had a gym in Springfield, and he had something like 38 people that could deadlift 500 pounds. And I couldn't deadlift 500 pounds at the time. And I said, how did you do that? And he said, well, I got one of them to do it.
Right.
And then the rest of them wanted to do it. And that's with humans. So I guess cattle are the same way. The other thing, there's something else I thought was interesting about this. So there is succession of civilizations. And around here, we got a bunch of Indian mounds, Native American First People mounds by the Mississippi. Huge city that existed maybe till 1500.
Right.
And then vanished. Mesa Verde in Colorado in this book he talks about some place in New Mexico that had pretty high density, high civilization people. Heck, you've got the Sahara Desert. You've got places all over where cities go back to the desert or the jungle, depending on where it is. Why does that happen? And so the theory is they screwed up the water table by doing something to the ruminant animals. And so the place was no longer a place you could live because the sparse rainfall, which used to be enough, is no longer enough. He says in 1948 or something, they measure the water that goes over Victoria Falls, which is a fall, I think, way on it's on the Nile, I believe.
On the eastern side, isn't it?
There's a lot more water going over the falls now than used to be. And you think, first of all, oh, that's good. That means no, it's not good. It's not good because that means all that water is running straight through the gullies into the river and not going down into the soil. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. But this hasn't really happened in Europe. Why doesn't it happen in Europe? Well, what do you know about the climate in Europe?
It's non-brittle.
Yeah, it's moist. It's got the Gulf Stream. It's pretty far north, but it gets plenty of rain. I've heard, like in Slovakia, I've heard like the topsoil is 8 feet deep in some of those valleys. You could probably do things there that you can't do other places.
Yeah.
They haven't had ruminant herds running around Europe for a long, long time.
Yeah, not wild.
No, the Romans didn't have them. Nobody's writing about herds of oxen.
Or ox. You're right.
Yeah. This has been a long time that Europe hasn't had it. And so I was trying to defeat the book, but I don't think Europe's the same case. It's a different kind of a place.
Right.
It's a whole lot different than the middle section of the United States.
So you hadn't heard of this thing when I threw it out there.
Nope.
I think you came in fairly clean. I mean, you probably think if I said it was an interesting read that it was going to be interesting, but you came into it fairly clean. Do you think the man is right?
Well, I only read his side of it. It's a pretty persuasive argument when he shows you two sides of a fence, one that does it his way and one that does it the other way. and you can see the difference.
Yeah.
I don't know that there are alternative solutions proposed.
Well, I think that the main alternative solution is the one we see all the time. Put your 28% nitrogen root dress your stuff with your 28% nitrogen fertilizer. Put beans on corn, corn on beans. The question I have is, can you feed 7.5 billion people doing this?
I don't know.
I don't know. But one of my answers to that is, well, I don't know, but you can't feed 7.5 billion people doing what we're doing right now forever.
Right. Right. I didn't like all of his thoughts on population.
Like what? What was that?
Well, he only had two options, war or birth control.
Yeah, I disagree with that, because there's a third option, which is starvation.
Well, and there's a fourth option, which is virtue.
Oh, okay. Well, come on. Come on, Karl.
You know, a strong culture, you know, it's like nitrogen supplements for your family. You're not changing your behavior at all. You're just putting a chemical in to make the behavior not give the effect that you don't want it to have.
Right.
I'm not a big fan of that. I don't know. There's a lot of land that is underused, that is not very green, that should be greener.
Yeah. We might be able to do the 7.5 billion because, like he says, there's 50 billion, 50% of the Earth's surface is brittle and not very productive. You know, my friend Mike, he's been rotationally grazing and improved the production on his land enormously without using any fertilizer and very little diesel. Maybe you can. Maybe we can do it this way.
Yeah. I don't know. It's worth trying if you got some land, I think. My wife says I can't have cattle because you can never go on vacation.
If you have cattle, you don't need to go on vacation. You go look at them. Tell her that.
Well, she'll hear it.
Yeah, Melissa. Yeah, you don't need to go. I love the thing. So if you care about any of this, I highly recommend that book. You can go check out, like I said earlier, the Greg Judy Regenerative Grazing YouTube channel. You can go check out maybe Joel Salatin. He uses a lot of these methods. He's kind of famous. And then there's a guy named Pete, and he has a YouTube channel called Just a Few Acres Farm. And he has a little farm on 45 acres that is supporting he and his family. And they rotationally graze and do all of this stuff. And he's got 45 acres in upstate New York with a short growing period and is making money.
That's wonderful. Let's say you have a little plot like mine, and I'm just getting into this. I just planted a few potatoes last year and we ate them, so that was pretty good. Plant some more stuff this year. But you could look at your own land or your own porch on your high rise in Manhattan and say, what could I do of this? You know, what could I plant? What does the land want here? And what can I do to get some solar wealth out of this? And just like treat it like a game. You know, how can I figure this? I don't know. You probably want to catch your rainwater. You probably want to compost. The book was inspiring for that reason, making me think about what I could do, even not having a whole lot of acres, or even one. But just thinking, you know, I'm wasting all of this sunlight that's falling on my property. And solar panels is one thing, but food's another thing.
Yeah. Solar panels are so dumb. They're so dumb.
Well, that's another story. I mean, the problem with them is, it's my understanding that there are rare earths that are needed to make these solar panels that only exist in a certain mine in China or maybe the Congo. And the energy costs to make these things are pretty high.
Yeah, they don't make enough. If you only built solar panels with energy created from solar panels, you could not make solar panels.
Yeah, so it's like those petrochemical dollars you got to put in to make your food.
Yeah.
Yep.
The only reason the oil thing works is because it literally just comes out of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So when the fiat thing stops, and that's another thing, Karl. Let me get my box. I put my box away. Let me go get my box again. Man, when it comes to mineral wealth, we have picked all the low-hanging fruit.
Yep.
Like there was once where you could walk along in Alaska and like bend over and pick up a gold nugget. Guys would get a pie pan and punch holes in it and get down in a creek and play in the mud and get gold out of the creek. Well, now you need a rock crusher, big Caterpillar equipment, millions and millions of dollars to go get that deeper ore. In many cases, it's lesser quality too. And so you can look at anything like that, whether it's, there used to be gushers. You'd be drilling an oil well with a water well drilling rig, by the way, in Oklahoma, 120 foot deep. You'd hit oil that was under pressure. It'd blow all the pipe out of the ground. It was literally jumping out of the ground. To the point now where we're drilling holes 5 miles deep and doing horizontal boring, and they cost millions and millions of dollars. Every single move we make in the direction of technology is getting more expensive than the last move was.
Yeah. Well, and you can think of it this way. If you have your verdant field of pasture land and your cows are plowing it under with their hooves, that's your oil for 1 million years from now. You're doing it for the children.
Doing it for the children. Shoot. Yeah, I love the Allan Savory book. If you go watch that TED Talk, he shows many, many before and after pictures and many, many, many examples of concrete results that he has had with this method. I think it's like our weightlifting method. It works every time it's tried, as best I can tell.
Yeah, but it's hard.
But it's hard. You can't sit in a cab tractor with the air conditioner on listening to the radio and move the cattle three times a day during the spring flush. You've got to get out, move electric fence, and herd animals. We used to have things called herdsmen and shepherds, and they don't do that anymore. But they used to do that, Karl. Mm-hmm. Seems to have worked, but we got these tractors and four-wheelers want to sit on our ass. I don't know about all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just learning about it too. I'm fascinated. I think it represents what could possibly be a better way, and it's very interesting. But at any rate, he is a hell of a guy and good to read, I think.
Yeah, I actually thought it was fun. I wasn't sure it was going to be fun. I thought it'd be informative, but it was actually informative and fun.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Yeah. Oh, good. Thumbs up. Well, what's next trip, man?
I don't know. I sent you a note, and you made a suggestion. You want to do Small is Beautiful? How many pages is that?
I don't know. Small is Beautiful, A Study of Economics as If People Mattered by E.F. Schumacher. 1973, HarperCollins, 288 pages.
I don't even have it yet. Can we do an essay?
Sure.
Did you notice the shout out to Wendell Berry in this book?
I did.
Yeah. So books are cycling around. We got to pick some either philosophy or fiction probably after that. But we can do that.
Oh my gosh. Small is Beautiful. Yeah, we'll try that out. I don't know. See, these are just things I want to read, and we to keep sneaking those in.
Yeah, we were thinking we might do some comic books. And the comic book of comic books is Watchmen. So we might do that in the future. That's probably topical these days, I think. We'll find some other fun stuff to do. Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazov. It's only like 1,200 pages.
I'm working on Don Quixote. If you want to do that, I'm game, man.
I read half of that a long time ago.
I don't think I like it. I think it's nasty snark. I don't like it.
Yeah, I could understand that.
There's a kind of a sneering, metropolitan kind of, I don't know, too cool for school kind of attitude that the author has.
I hear that the second half is different.
I hope that's right, because I've not enjoyed Pars Prima or whatever they call it. I don't know. Not really enjoyed it. Honor's stupid. Nobody's virtuous. Idealism is dumb. That's the whole first half.
The funny thing is when you get into that, the musical they did of it.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that.
No, but it's the song everybody loves from that is The Impossible Dream, which presents it as not stupid and noble, and it's good that he's got these crazy dreams, because you have to have crazy dreams. So I wonder if they've gone opposite of the book.
I haven't read the whole thing yet. Stay tuned. But it seems like it's opposite of the book. Every time he tries something, he gets his ribs stomped. He gets his ass kicked. I just looked. The new edition, the new HarperCollins edition of this thing is 348 pages, Karl. I'm sorry, man. We need to find something else.
I can do it.
The Shelby Foote Civil War trilogy
That's
for next Thursday.
Walker Percy's The Moviegoer.
How long's that?
It's one of his shorter ones.
I really want to read that Small is Beautiful, but I can't get it done. Next week, I'm all in a tizzy over here. I can't get that done.
We could pull some Walker Percy.
Let's do that. 272 pages. 70 pages less.
Yeah, but it's a novel.
Okay. All right. I just dropped the hammer on it. Okay. Done.
Yep.
All
Disaffected youth, but not pessimistic, I don't think.
Please tell me it's the anti-Catcher in the Rye.
It might be.
Ugh, hate that thing. Well, there is an Online Great Books podcast. That was fun. It was interesting to read that. I hope somebody picks this thing up. If you're interested in permaculture, homesteading, environmentalism, food security, the good life, wouldn't hurt you to get Holistic Resource Management by Allan Savory and have a crack at that thing. It's a secret held in plain sight, it seems like, this guy's philosophy and his method.
Mm-hmm. And so if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend or two or 10. Check out our other show. I think we're doing very good work. Music and Ideas podcast. You can also share that one with your friends.
Doesn't stink.
What did we just do? We did funk.
We did funk.
Which I liked a whole lot better after we did the show than I did before.
Carl didn't have a lot to say about that one. He wanted to talk about the Man of La Mancha or whatever. All right, well, there's that. Hey, by the way, I asked my friend last night, I said, hey, can I borrow your phone? I want to look at some stuff on iTunes. And I looked up Music and Ideas, couldn't find it. I typed in Music and Ideas Scott Hambrick, didn't come up. Typed in Online Great Books, it didn't come up. I typed up Online Great Books podcast, then it came up in the search results, and the Music and Ideas show came up at that point. I asked him if I could use his phone because, my phone knows me. So I just wanted to see what came up with his. So I don't know, we are having some search engine difficulties, so I think that the way that we're going to have to grow this thing is through your recommendation of word of mouth. So if you think we don't stink, man, pass it on. That's a big help to us. And we're going to read a little Walker Percy for next week, and you can go to onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast and sign up to go to a free seminar where we're going to talk about another chunk of Percy, his essay, The Loss of the Creature. We do that once a month, and get in there. We'll be changing that essay, I don't know, in a couple of months. We'll do another 2 or 3 of those, then we'll change it up. But get in there on Percy while supplies last. Boom, the end.